Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Hollywood Breaks. So good to be with you here today. You know, television is not the same as it used to. It's not consumed the same, and it's definitely not created the same. So today, Keith and I talk about this amazing 5-part series that the Ankler has on the American television viewer and what it really takes to make good content. So welcome and enjoy the show. Did you vote for any of the Emmys this year?
No, I missed it this year.
Can you actually still be a member if you're not voting?
I did. I voted for nominees, but there was so much stuff that I just didn't get a chance to see, and I'm an honest broker like that, and I just didn't feel comfortable voting for shows that I hadn't had a chance to watch yet, and it was already the deadline, and I was like, there's no way I'm gonna be able to get through all this. So
same thing. Like I couldn't, the category that I'm in, I think you're in the same category. There are so many things to watch that I can't get through all of it.
I got through all the main title sequences in the nomination process, because that's the branch you and I are part of. So I got through all those, and I was able to watch a lot of the animated stuff. But then when it came time to actually vote for a lot of the stuff, it's like, I haven't seen half of this stuff. Like for the drama, I think I did vote for the stuff that's in our category, but like best drama, best comedy, there were like 3 or 4 shows that I hadn't seen anything of, and I was like, I'm not going to be the guy that votes for the show I want to win, even though the shows I would have voted for won anyway. But it's still like I felt like I needed to be on Osberg, so I just didn't vote for those ones.
Would you wonder if that's if it's skewed that way? Well, I'll just say we should start with, hey, welcome Hollywood Breaks. Great to be with you, Keith.
There's that part.
This last week was the Emmys. So I watched the Emmys on Monday, which I gotta say, it kind of caught me by surprise. My wife was sitting outside, and she just said to me, "The Emmys are on," and it was midday.
Most people feel.
It was midday, so we were getting Twitter answers or whatever, Instagram answers. I don't know. My wife was on the phone, so whatever feed she was getting at 4:00 in the afternoon or 5:00 in the afternoon in Los Angeles, because the Emmys do a rebroadcast where the Oscars don't do the rebroadcast. They don't do the delay. So you already know who the winners are before you start the show. If you're in LA, unless of course you're at the event in Los Angeles, then you would get it right away. So I started watching it a little bit, put it on pause, and watch the show later. And I don't know what to think about the show. I got to be honest. There's a part of me that thinks it was horrible. Like there was a lot of things that were very disconnected in the bits that they were doing and the presentation of the shows itself. But I'll say but there are also moments where I thought the director did an amazing job. It felt like they put the camera in the room, the way they rolled out the clip packages in the room. I kind of understood what the director was doing of, hey, you should feel like you're here with us. So thought that was a kind of a good spin. And the writing of the show was mostly, entertaining or fun.
Yeah.
But what the disconnect to me is there's so many shows. And there was a moment where BJ Novak and Mindy Kaling from The Office came out to present for Best Writer. And they were very clever. They basically said, we're here to present for Best Writer, you lazy son of a bitches. Because basically when we did it was 26 episodes, and you write 6 and that,
or
and
you're 13 or 10.
And I think they nailed it in the idea of that's the problem. Like there are so many 6-episode shows which have been a failure back in the day. They ordered 6 and they canceled the show. That's the way it was done. That there is a disconnect of who am I rooting for, and which show do I care for. And in the case of voting, am I supposed to watch all of this?
Basically,
there's a lot to consume.
You basically have to sign your life away when you vote, saying you have watched at least 1 episode of every single nominated show. And I'm like, how in the hell do people do this? I just couldn't find enough time in the day to watch how many 7 hours of TV in a span of 3 weeks. It's impossible. I don't know how they do it, but they figured it out, I guess.
Well, even just the category of drama, comedy, it's almost like there's such a large scale. Are we identifying all the audience members, whatever? So I don't know. There's a part of it I just thought like, this is horrible. I don't really understand who I'm. I don't get how some of the Saturday Night Live is in the same category as Ted Lasso, or I don't know that wasn't necessarily true, but there was like these weird mix-ups of like that the genre and format isn't considered. It's very odd, and it made me think of like, what has it always been this odd, or were we more just like interested in watching the red carpet and the celebrities, that the award show was just an excuse to kind of
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because the Emmys have always sort of been treated like the redhead stepchild of the award show. You know, you have the Oscars, which is considered the gold standard, right? The Grammys, which is like really cool because they occasionally will mix the way they stand out because they mix acts together that you wouldn't traditionally mix together, right? And live music is always sort of entertaining. And then there's the Grammy or the Emmys that are sort of like an afterthought. You know, I think maybe 20, 30 years ago, they were like the thing because there wasn't all these different categories, right? It was sort of best actor in comedy, best actor drama, best actress comedy, best actress drama. Now it's like best actress drama / limited series only on a streaming service that premieres on this date on this date. And it's just like granted, the Academy, I give them credit for trying to keep up with how everything has changed, but at the same time, they've created all these different categories. It's like, wait, limited series or TV movie, and like, well, wait a minute, what's the between TV movie and a Netflix movie? Huh? So it's I mean, it's one of those things where it's a tough show to put together. It's not always the most popular show, and as I said, it's kind of an afterthought when it comes down to it. And the other thing is, like, people just aren't watching as much TV anymore. Like, must-see TV doesn't really exist. And you know, when that phrase came into being, we had Friends, you know, just after the Cosby Show era, and all these shows that were so huge, and nobody, you know, every Thursday night, you know, you didn't do anything because you were watching NBC most likely, and then you were watching TGIF on Friday on ABC. So it was like, those are the times when everyone just watched TV, and you know, you had Friends.
Keith, what was on TGIF on Fridays?
It started with Full House, then Family Matters.
Was that where
Step by Step?
Oh, Step by Step.
And then there's one more I'm forgetting. I can't remember the other one. I only liked Family Matters.
So Urkel was Friday night.
Urkel was Friday night. That's the only show I watched.
Nerdy kids that were home on Friday night watched their friend.
Everyone else watched Full House. I didn't like Full House. I found it annoying. But I liked Family Matters was great. I mean, that show was hysterical. And then Step by Step I never got into. So. And there's one more I'm missing. I think
I got you on a tangent. Don't go down a tangent.
Yeah, don't get me on a tangent. See, all right, we just lost 10 minutes on TGIF, Tim. Way to go, buddy. Way to go.
No.
Way to harness the show.
I think TGIF must have been after my time. I'm pretty sure I was out on Friday nights hanging out with my friends or doing something.
You were just so
and
cool.
You were, I don't know what.
I'll talk to your 5 boys about how cool you are. I'm sure I'd get 5 to know that you're not that cool.
I'm pretty sure I'm cool. Okay, anyway. Yeah, I'm with you. To me, that the seasonality of it too, where, for example, Squid Game was nominated and won this year, but it felt like it was 2 years ago. Because the way OTT releases is basically constantly releasing something. So you don't have a sense of seasonality. Who is working it? So even Ted Lasso wasn't recently released, but
or Succession
was when
for
it
that
shows.
Matter,
or
Succession.
Yeah.
That feels like it was ages ago, and you know, and that's, I think, the other part of them is that, I mean, it's partially the release calendar because, you know, with the Oscars they usually have heavy loaded at the end of December. So by February or March, when the show, you know, it's not that far removed from when the movies were in the theaters, but with the Emmys, it's a different ball game. But it's interesting because, you know, you talked a little bit about, you know, watching the show and actually suffering through it. And you think about, if you look at the ratings, they've got 5 million, you know, viewers, which is not spectacular, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not terrible. And, you know, a good friend of our podcast, at the Entertainment Strategy Guy, who we've talked about repeatedly, I've talked about in my newsletter, who I just talked about in my newsletter this past week, actually. He did a fantastic series, a 5-part series on The American Viewer. And it was really a deep dive into sort of data points, and each part had a different subject matter. Like part one was sort of like the age and gender and race and all that stuff. Part two was sort of the religiosity, I think, and then part three started getting what they watch or how they watch. Four was what they watch, and part five was sort of like, here are my conclusions. And the overall tenure of the piece was basically like, listen, I'll use religion as an example. You can see the sort of the trend. Yes, we read all about the growing vibes of the nuns, the people that don't affiliate with any particular religion, but they consider themselves spiritual. So yes, the trend towards in the country is trending downward with regards to religion, but it's still 45% of the country considers themselves religious. That's a lot of people. So yes, maybe the trend's downward, but it's still a hearty audience. And referring to the award show, he had a section sort of talking about, yes, they're trending downward, but 5 million people plus whatever the Live Plus 3 ratings are is still a good chunk of it's still a good chunk. Like, especially given, you just have some shows on TV that are barely break 1 million. So it's not necessarily terrible. So,
you mean the demographic portion of it too? I think there was some focus on wealth, and just the idea of, I think it's the quote that you say of the people
behind
gates, and there's very much this idea of out of touch of who we really are and who the viewers are, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Because if you're making a television show, it really is about meeting the audience and hitting a demographic, eventually getting advertisement and pay attached to that. But if you're not pushing shows out there, you can be wondering where are all the viewers? What's really happening to the viewers? And blaming it on everything else. But you can also blame yourself as a show creator, as a broadcast executive, and just recognizing you're totally out of touch with the reality of what really takes to put a show on, and who really wants to watch it. I think Mark Burnett a few years ago did a religious TV show. I think
I worked on it.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Well, I worked on the theatrical release, Son of God. Yeah.
Son of God.
Right. He did a series, and then we bought the movie, and I worked on the movie. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mark Burnett, the guy who creates Survivor and The Apprentice, kind of at one point realized, wait a second, there's a lot of religious people watching.
He's actually religious. He's he's religious Christian. Yes.
Yeah. But still recognizing, I mean, he's a TV show creator. He made Survivor, right? He could have kept on making live TV shows, but when you're a TV executive, you're not just doing it out of your personal convictions and heart. Like, you have to find an audience. It's how television works. So there is some reality of and models that work. I just wonder why they are ignored. What is it that we're doing in Hollywood that says, let's ignore these demographics? Are we really just blind to that? Are the executives blind to the reality of what America is? There you go.
I think, listen, I think there's part of that. It's the bubble mentality, which has always been sort of a problem with the industry as a whole. It's an industry that attract, there are a lot of people who it's very similar in terms of their backgrounds, where they grew up, what school they went to. And there's just this vibe of, I don't really have to know the audience. It's just about my gut. And at the same time, it's like, well, yeah, but you kind of do have to know your audience. You just reminded me of I believe it was Dana Walden. When I was in leadership program at Fox, she came to speak to us, and she referenced something that Peter Chernin said to her. She was I think she was at the office late one night. And he walked in and said, "What are you doing here?" And she's like, "I'm working." He's like, "Yeah, well, you know what would be better work? Go to the grocery store. Go mingle amongst the viewing audience instead of staring at your computer. Just get out. Like, you need to interact with the people who watch your content. Like, this is not going to do that." And I think that's very much a minority point of view. And something that Entertainment Strategy Guy brought up in his sort of part 5 series was like, you can't worry. You got to stop with the prestige cocktail. Like, I want to talk about this at a cocktail party. You got to stop with the idea of like, well, if I go to a cocktail party and said I worked on Below Deck Med or whatever, which is a hugely popular show, most people at the cocktail probably be like, oh, what a piece of trash. But you know what? It makes Bravo a crap load of money, and it's a franchise. So isn't that basically your job, to create things that people want to watch? And it's funny because, like, you know, I think of myself, you take the example, Succession and Yellowstone, right?
Yeah.
Succession, if you were to judge its success based on its coverage, you would think it is the most watched show in America. And Yellowstone, nobody gives two hoots about that show. However, the reverse is true. Yellowstone is actually one of the most popular shows on TV. It gets like 12 to 13 million viewers live every week when it's premiering. And I don't even know what the +3, +7 numbers are. Probably into the 20s, 30 millions. But Succession is half that, maybe. And don't get me wrong, they're both great shows, but Succession is very much a coastal show, whereas Yellowstone is sort of a broader show. But for whatever reason, you know, there's still this sort of disconnect that I want to be able to go to a party and talk about what movies I make. And, you know, it's funny, I just finished the Offer series on Paramount Plus, which is about the making of The Godfather. And Matthew Good does a smashing good job. See what I did there? As Robert Evans, the head of Paramount, in terms of talking about, you know, movies. And like the movies he was talking about were all great movies, like Rosemary's Baby, The Godfather. But you know what? They were all huge box office hits. Like, you had this guy who grew up in New York, you know, was a failed actor, stumbled in to run one of the, you know, legacy studios, and creates all these great legendary movies that the audience also loves. It's like, it's almost like we had this great miracle period. Everyone talks about the 70s as like this great era when, you know, movies were just amazing. And then all of a sudden we went to the blockbuster era, right? Where, you know, Spielberg and Lucas were making all these great movies that were popcorn hits, but also making a lot of money. And then it just started to shift downhill. And then all of a sudden everything diverged, and the audience went one way and the executives went the other. And it doesn't seem like
he didn't cover this directly in those articles, but it's very interesting to look at just demographics, number of bodies of people at a certain age, and to recognize, you know, the baby boomer era and the blockbuster era go hand in hand, right? You have a lot of starting family, you know, like the largest generation ever starting families.
Until the millennials.
The kids are growing up, exactly right. And then so the fact that they would go, and the way the technology worked, the way they would go in large numbers to major films, of course blockbusters would work. Of course they would. The numbers match, right? So then you have now that generation is, you know, a third of the millennial generation, which are equal in numbers. But when the millennials come on board, the divergence took place. So we don't have the concentration of 3 networks, you know, a mainstream media feed into movie theaters that leads to videos that lead to in-home, you know, entertainment eventually. Now you have a large body of people that are absolutely distracted, call it off platform, in video games, watching TikTok, you know, consuming Snapchats, you know, whatever those items are, they're not being measured in the same entertainment sectors that we're talking about. And that is not going to give us the same boom that we had before. It doesn't mean the audience doesn't exist. And to his point, what's interesting is that OTT content that anybody can find what they're looking for at any moment is a great kind of feeder for this large audience, but we're not going to see the same booms as that. So that downward trajectory we're feeling in the blockbuster world is a reality. Some of it is just because of the measured ability of people's age, earnings, and those basic demographics that are not going to drive people back into theaters or mainstream TV shows.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You know, I was just thinking as you were talking, you know, the other thing I think that is a struggle is that I think the industry itself is not able to recruit as well from all over as it used to. It's sort of become very insular. Like, you have a lot, like back in the day, it was rare to find a studio exec's kid working at the studio. some role.
Oh yeah.
I mean, granted you had your Xanax, don't get me wrong. You had your Xanax. There was definitely nepotism. I don't want to say that there was no nepotism in Hollywood.
And we don't have nepotism here on Hollywood Breaks, thank goodness.
Right. Yes. So it's sort of like now you have a lot of studio exec kids who are just getting into the industry, and it's that bubble. It's just recycling the same people who go to the same schools, who all sort of think the same. And that sort of idea, like a Robert Evans, who grew up, I think, poor in New York City, and scrabbled his way over to LA, and then all of a sudden becomes the head of a studio. He never lost that sort of like sense of how he grew up, and it seems like because the similarities, and it's become so insular, that's why the content isn't as broad as it once was. Yeah. And your point about the millennials sort of again sort of taking over, and that idea of the 3 broadcast networks and going to the movies on a Friday night, it's not part of the process anymore. So I mean, there's probably an aspect of that involved as well, but I think the disconnect is still very much there, and I think that's a big part of the problem.
That's smart to say. I think that we often get to kind of poke fun at some of the reality of what were the flyover states, and how it's disconnected in a lot of decision making from studios. The studio heads, executives are not really doing that. And to be honest, without the really need for gatekeepers for entertainment anymore, I mean, the other distraction channels that are out there are void of a gatekeeper. So if somebody's making local content, or somebody's making something that their friends want to watch, their friends will watch something that is a very small group of people, because they're not getting fed from something bigger. But I like that idea of like that you're pointing to, is like the ego-driven nature of Hollywood is putting the blinders on, and bubble, or their same family, or the same school group, or whatever that is. If that's all the content's always been made from the same bubble, how do we get out of it? What's the breakthrough that it takes? I guess some of what we talk about on Hollywood Breaks is to say, hey, there are moments that we could take advantage of, and maybe these articles are kind of pointing to proof that there's a greater audience than what's out there. Why not push it? Why not explore that?
I think a part of it is also getting out of LA. I think that's a big part. It's something that's one of the reasons I started Vision Craft Brew, was to sort of get out, help the talent, and help produce materials and content that wasn't based in LA, just LA. And I think that's part of the problem, is it's very focused in one city, or 2 cities if you include New York. And that's part of the problem. It's just so focused. Now, we see a lot of shooting, they're shooting a lot of stuff in Atlanta and parts of Georgia, and Louisiana's been a hot spot, but they come, they shoot the movie, they leave. That's not establishing any sort of market there. And I think that's part of the problem. And I think if you start pulling it out, the nexus out of LA, and start maybe looking to build something outside of those 2 cities, you'll start recruiting people who maybe have a better eye for what a broader audience is wanting to watch, and the opportunities that might be there for differing content, versus just everything that produced in LA. Because then you're still going to be in that bubble. It doesn't matter. I mean, even if God willing, a vast majority of executives read the 5-part series and take a lot of Entertainment Strategy Guy's advice, which he gives in part 5, to heal and actually do it. I mean, who knows how long that's going to last. It's still the ego-driven mindset of walking into a cocktail party and saying, I worked with Martin Scorsese on The Irishman, 3-hour movie that made Netflix $2, versus I worked on Below Deck Med, which is not a prestige piece, but again, it makes Bravo millions of dollars a year, and it's the grounding of a franchise for them. So,
well, do you think that the new kind of platform play too, where what they're calling it fast, that there is just another group of people distributing content out there that's going to disrupt things even more? Like on my Roku TV, I can just turn on and free advertised content, right? What's the fast ever? Free
ad-supported television.
Ad-supported television.
Yes.
And to be able to just say like, oh, that's what I'm going to turn on now, instead of HGTV or Cooking Channel, whatever it's been on the background for years. I can actually just take this free one. I don't, because I'm not really paying attention to it.
Right.
But when those platforms, as those platforms become more and more viable, because more and more people start tuning into it, that's new channels for people to make content, to reach an audience, to reach some of those hard to reach people, different demographics, either ethnically or geographically centered, that we're talking about, that are huge opportunities if people reach out and make content for them.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, that's another thing that the entertainment strategy guy points out, is it's like, it's kind of the content people just want to have a play in the background while you're making dinner, or you're on your iPhone, iPad, whatever, putting the kids to bed. You just want something in the background, and the free ad-supported TV gives you that option. It's not always the greatest content, but sometimes it's, you know, from an era bygone, and sometimes like, oh, look at that, they had the Brady Bunch, why not watch an episode of the Brady Bunch?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that it's just another opportunity that I think, because everything has shifted so hard into streaming, now it's sort of like, well, wait a minute, because you say free ad supported TV. You said this in our pre-show. I was like, wait a minute, isn't that just broadcast? I'm like, yeah, it basically is, except it's on your device, not on your cable box. So that's the big difference. So there's still aspects of things that are still very familiar. And again, as the ESG guy points out, like, there are trends that are pointing towards, you know, where we're headed. Like, you know, cord cutting is a reality. It is gonna happen. Reward shows are not driving viewers. Yes, we're trending to be a less religious country, but right now we're not. So it's like, look at the reality in which we live versus what's coming, and start developing content that sort of serves the audience as it is, versus the audience what it's going to be maybe 10, 15, because we don't even know if those are accurate assumptions anyway. Something could happen that shifts it in the opposite direction. So, you know, I think it's playing more in the reality of now versus the reality of what we want it to be. And I think that's another disconnect that Hollywood's really struggling with right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, struggling with now, probably if any given moment we made this podcast series, right? If we were in the middle of the 90s, we would talk about what the struggle is there, and how certain television shows are out of touch with, we'll say, reality. That's part of the challenge always of putting content out there. Should content be imaginary? Like, is it something that is beyond what people could currently comprehend? Of course the answer is yes. There are shows out there that absolutely works for. Should shows be idealistic, so that it's creating a world that you hope that the world becomes, even though reality is somewhat different? So that escape moments are some of what's out there. Being forced items, almost like agenda-driven items, very political in nature nowadays, that you can say, oh, I think we're just feeding the beast itself. And I think that's where the disconnect and the frustration might be, and where people want the escape. They'll turn on Brady Bunch over turning on some of the stuff that's on television, because the drama shows are almost too close to home. They're too convincing. I don't want to think about it that hard.
Well, it's fun. You know, it's another thing you brought up was the popularity of procedurals, like, you know, things like, you know, we have the cop shows, and the doctor shows, and the firefighter shows, and the FBI. I mean, there's a reason that those shows basically sustained CBS. They're just really popular, but none of the streamers really have shows like that. Netflix doesn't have it. Apple TV Plus doesn't have it. You know, Paramount Plus Paramount Plus has some that are coming over from CBS, so they're not completely blind to the idea that these shows are still popular. But places like Netflix, Apple TV Plus, I mean, come on, can you imagine a cop show on Apple TV Plus? They're so high on their own supply over there. There's no way they'd ever produce a show, because they think it's beneath them. But it's like, but that's what people want to watch. Like, I get the idea of really wanting to make something. It's something you bring up all the time when you're rev thinking. Like, you start with who your audience is, not what you're going to make. Who's the audience? And and again, that's sort of leads right into what entertainment strategy guy is saying. Like, we got to serve the audience as it currently exists. And I think the problem is, a lot of the executives in Hollywood just serve people like them. And it's like, they watch stuff like Succession, they watch stuff like, you know, other shows, and that aren't necessarily broadly popular. Every now and then you stumble on something like a Game of Thrones, which is broadly popular, but those are sort of catching fire in a jar, and that's not necessarily something that happens on a regular basis.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it was Seinfeld that jokes about the My Pillow TV show. And he basically says, like, the only way television works is people have to watch that show in order for it to keep on being aired. And it's aired constantly. So people are watching the My Pillow mattress infomercial.
Because they're buying it, and then he's using it. He's using that money.
Otherwise, he wouldn't keep going. So we realized that's
it's
a television
working.
show.
That's why they do it.
It's a piece of content. That's more recognized and seen more than some of the stuff that people are trying to like make some idealistic picture of it. Like, well, no, but the My Pillow TV show is more popular than yours, or whatever that is.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's some reality check of what it takes to make content.
Yes.
Well, I like the series like you did. Thanks for forwarding that on to me and putting it out there.
I didn't forward it, Tim. You're a subscriber to the Ankler, right?
Well, that's what I mean, to recognize that, so I can. Of course, I'm a subscriber to the Ankler.
Yes, you should.
As
everyone listening should be.
That's exactly it. I get my Ankler and my Vision Craft Brew. They come into the same box
right now. Founders Brew, Tim. Founders Brew.
Oh, that's my Founders Brew. Sorry,
your Founders Brew.
Vision Craft Brew is what's in the cup. Sorry.
Yeah, that's
Founders Brew is what shows up in my inbox.
Oh, you're killing me, man. You're killing me, Smalls. You're killing me.
I'll get it straight one of these days. Don't
worry.
You'll
get it straight one of these days. One of these days. Maybe after 300 episodes.
We'll get there. But the series is great, and some critical thinking that's necessary in Hollywood.
Yes.
So we appreciate that, and it really kind of goes in theme with what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Hollywood is breaking; it's falling apart, but there's opportunity to break in if you pay attention and you recognize what's there.
You recognize the trend.
As you say,
there's opportunity.
Yeah. And as you say, like, hey, start with why, who, what, where, and then make the what. Like, put what you're making last, because there's an audience looking for the show that you can create. So we like that part of it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, my friend.
Happy to
Great
be here.
to be with you this week. Just remember, next week I'm not going to be here.
I know, and Robin Geisen, our special guest co-host, will be joining us next week. So be sure to tune in for her triumphant return to Hollywood Breaks.
Yes, she's the first after the 100.
Yes,
but we want to say, for all of you, it's not because we like Robin the best. Well, we're not saying we like Robin the best. Probably. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, maybe.
We're just starting up again.
Yes. Getting back into the flow of having guests on after the summer slowdown. Yes. Yep.
Well, tell Robin hi for me. Thanks for filling in for me as I'm going to go off to Florida for a wedding. And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
See you in a couple weeks. Adios.
Thank you.